All right, welcome to part 3 of the spatial inventory system. So in the last two, we got it set up so that our grid would show, and we can kind of pick up items, but they don't actually show up on the grid yet. So that's the next part we need to do, is to actually be able to visualize what's going on. So to do that, let's go to our inventory widget. And, actually, let's go to our inventory grid widget, rather. And we want to go inside of the initialize function. So go to the initialize function. And we kind of left off here where we created the line segments. So the next thing we need to do is write a function which will render the actual images or the actual icons of the images in our inventory on top of the grid. So to do that, I'm going to make a function over here and I'm going to call it refresh. So I'm going to make a function and we will call it refresh. And what refresh is referring to is it's refreshing the state of the inventory. So it's kind of like redrawing the inventory. And I'm going to add this to the private category since we want it to be private. And we will set the access specifier to private as well. So again, what this needs to do is it needs to populate this grid. I know you can't see the grid here, but this is where the grid's going to be, or this is where the grid is. So it needs to populate the grid with the items at the correct location and at the correct size and also at the correct orientation once we get the rotation working. So we're basically going to be populating this grid canvas panel, which is, again, just this guy. So when we call refresh, the first thing we want to do is we want to clear all of the children on this grid panel so that it deletes all of the old ones. So let's drag this in and we will say clear children so that we have a fresh canvas to work with. The next thing we want to do is we want to drag in our inventory component and we want to get all of the items that the inventory component has inside of it. So to do that, we're going to have to make a little function inside of here that gets us access to that. So let's go to our inventory component real quick, and we'll come back to that in a second. So over here on the left, we're going to make a function, and it's going to be called get all items, and it's going to be public. So drag it into the public category. So get all items, we want it to be constant because it's not going to be changing anything about the class, so select the constant. So what this function is actually going to do is it's going to return to us a map of each item, like each unique item inside of our inventory, and then also which tile is the top left corner of that item. So we're going to add an output type here, and it's going to actually be a type of map. So if you hit this little circle button or whatever, and you hit map, we want it to be a map. And we want it to be of type item object for the key. So make sure, I think it's already set to this, but make sure it's set to BP item object, like so. And make sure that the value type is set to tile. Because again, what this is going to represent is it's going to, or this map is going to contain each unique item inside of our inventory. And then that's going to be the key of the map. And then the value of the map is going to be the tile of the top left corner of that item. So we basically need to populate this map and then return it. So in order to do that, we need to make a local variable for it. Actually, let's call this all items first. So this is all the items basically inside of our inventory. So we need to make a local variable first so that we can actually populate it and return something. So if we just right click on this and say promote to local variable, we can call this all items, and then in parentheses you can say local. And so that's what we want to return. So we just basically need to populate this guy so that we can return it. So I'm going to unhook this for right now, drag this over because we're going to need a little bit of room here. So the first thing we want to do is we want to loop over all of our items because we're trying to find all of the items that we contain basically. So we'll say for each loop, and the for each loop, we want to save this guy as a local variable just to make things easier. So we'll right click and say promote to local variable, and we will call this the current item object and then local, like so. And so what we want to do with each item is we want to first of all check if it is valid. I'm just going to move this guy out of the way for right now. Say is valid. So if it is valid, then what we want to do is we want to check if it's already inside of our all items array. So drag this in, and we'll say contains, because if it's already in here, then there's no point of adding it again. And so we want to check if it contains this guy. So we'll just add a little reroute node here, and then hook him up down here, like so. And so if it does not contain it, so we're going to say a not boolean, and then we'll do a branch. So if it does not already contain it, then we simply just want to add it. So I'm just going to copy this guy, and we will say add. And so we want to add this current item. So we will drag in our current item, and we want to add it at the tile that we found it at. So the tile that we found it at is going to be whatever array index that we are currently in for our items array, and we want to convert that to a tile. So we'll say index to tile, and we basically want to hook this up over here. So I'm going to drag this over here, and I'm just going to add some reroute nodes by double clicking, just so it's a little cleaner, like so. All right. And then finally, once this array is completed, so let me just drag this guy over here. So once this is completed, then we want to drag in our return node and hook this up to completed. So again, just to kind of recap what's going on here, because it's really not that complicated. All we're doing is we're looping over all of the items, or all of the tiles in our array, basically, and we are checking if there is actually an item there. And if there is, then we are checking if we've already added that item to our output map. And if we have not, then we simply add it to our map, and we pass in the item for the key, and we pass in the tile that we found it at for the value. And then finally, when the array finishes, we just return all of the items that we found from the function. Okay, so now we can come back to our inventory grid widget, and let's see, inventory grid, and we can say get all items, like so. And then we want to loop over these. So we'll say, oh, we can't because I haven't written this yet, of course. Okay, so if you've noticed, when you drag off of a map, there is no for loop. I don't know why they haven't created a macro for looping over a map, because it's kind of like a normal thing to do, especially in C++. But that's okay, because we can write our own macro to do it. It's really actually pretty simple. So over here, let's see, over here on the left, let's just make a little macro real quick. If it works, macro, there we go. Or actually, an easier way to do it, let's delete this. Let's just write the code and then we'll collapse it to a macro. That'll be a little bit easier. So we want to take this and we want to get all of the keys. So if you drag out this and say keys, we'll return to you all of the keys. And then we want to loop over each one of these. So we'll say for each loop. And then we want to find the key, find this key in the map. So we will, we will drag off of this guy again. Or actually, let me make a reroute node. Drag off this guy again, and we will say find. And so we want to find this specific key, like so. And then let's just collapse all of this to a macro. So if you highlight all of this and say collapse to macro, it'll create us a macro, and then we just need to kind of clean this up a little bit. So if we go in here, we want to rename this to for each item. And then the output pin, we want to output the loop body. We want to output the item object, which is the array element. So let's rename this to item object. Item object. And we want to output also the value, which is the top left tile. So let's drag this guy in, and we will call it the top left tile. And then we also want to output when it completes, like so. So this is kind of a handy little macro that lets you loop over a map, and then it returns to you the key and the value. So now we can come back here to our refresh, We can have this for each item, and it's a lot cleaner to look at. So we're basically just looping over each of the items in that map. And what we want to do is we want to create the item, or we want to create the widget that represents that item. So if we right click and we say create widget, the widget we want to create is our item widget, which I don't think we've done anything with this class yet, so we'll have to work on it a little bit. Let's just hook this up and then we'll go fix that in a second. So the owning player is going to be our owning player, so get owning player. And then, yeah, let's go ahead and actually work on this before we go any further. So let's click this little magnifying glass, and then that will bring us to where we need to edit. And so let's open this guy up. So yes, okay, so inside of here, we have the canvas panel. We need to add a background border, or sorry, a size box, first of all, because we need to be able to set the size of this thing. So add a size box onto the canvas panel, and we will call this the background size box. And we want to make sure that we have it set to is variable so that we can actually use it as a variable. And then we want to set the anchors to be the whole screen. And then we want to set it to 0, 0. And then we want to select width override and height override. And we want to just leave it as 0 because we're going to be setting these values in code, like in blueprints, depending on like how big the item needs to be. So I think that's all we need to do for that. And then we need to add a border. So we'll add a border to the size box. And we will rename this to background border. And then for this one, we also want to select is variable. And then the main thing we want to change here is the color of it. So if we scroll down to brush color, let me see what I set it to my other one. Yeah, so we scroll down to brush color. We want to change this to be 0, 0, 0, and 0.5, so it has a nice dark background to it. And then finally, the last thing we want to add is the actual image, which is going to represent the icon, or like the thumbnail of the item in the inventory. So let's add an image, and we want to add this to the canvas panel. So drag it on top of the canvas panel. And then we want to set the anchor point. So if we drag up, we want to set the anchor point to be the center. And then we want to set the position to 0, 0, and the size to 0, 0 as well, and the alignment to 0.5 and 0.5. And again, the reason we're setting the size to 0 is because we'll be setting this in code. And let's just rename this to image. Or I guess we can't. We'll call it item image, I guess. Okay, so that's everything we need on this tab, I think. I'm thinking. Yes, okay. So let's go to the graph tab. And inside of here, we need to do a few things. So we need to add a variable over here for the tile size. So add a variable, and we will call this tile size. And we want to make this instance editable, blueprint read only, expose on spawn, and private. And we will set it to a float. And so kind of like we did before, I'm just going to delete all of this because we don't really need it. Kind of like we did before, we want to be able to initialize this. So we'll say event on initialize. And then I'm going to use that trick that I did before where we add a delay node of 0 seconds, just so that it has time for this value to get set. And then we will call a refresh function. So let's just say add custom event, and we'll call it refresh. And then we just want to call that event. So we'll just drag in refresh and hook it up like so. And so inside of here, inside of this refresh function, basically this is going to get called whenever the inventory is being redrawn. So in order to redraw the item, what we want to do is we want to take the item object, which I forgot to add. So we need to add a variable up here for the item object. So add a variable, call it item object, and then set it to item object, like so. And then this one also, we want it to set to all of this good stuff. And we should probably be moving this to a private category as well with the tile size. And then we also want to add one for the size. So we'll add another variable and we will call it size. And this one we want to make it a vector 2D. And we will add this to the private category as well, except for this one, we just need it to be private because we're actually going to be setting this one inside of the refresh function. Okay, so essentially what we need to do here is we need to figure out what size we want this thing to be, and we need to set it to that size. So we can get the item object, and we can say get dimensions, and then we can split this guy up. And so the size is going to be the dimensions of the object times the tile size. So we'll say float times, maybe we'll give it the tile size. And we want to do the same thing for the y, so we'll say float times the tile size. And so this is going to be the actual size. So if we drag in our size now, we can say set, and we can hook that up, and then we can split this guy and hook that up to the x and the y, like so. And so now we know what size we want it to be, so we can take our size box, so drag in our background size box, and we will say set width override, or set width override. And so for the width, we obviously want it to be our size x, so drag in size again, say get, split it, that's our x. And then we want to do the same thing for the height, so copy paste, set height override, and that is going to be our y value. Just add a little reroute node here. And then finally, we want to set the size of the actual image. So let's drag in our item image. And we need to say slot as canvas slot so we can actually set the size of it. And then we will say set size, and hook that up. And then we can just directly pass in our size variable to this, like so. And so that is our refresh function for our item. Pretty straightforward. We're just saying the size of it. And then let's see if there's anything else we should do here. Oh yeah, one thing we should do inside of here before we move on is back on the designer tab, if you click on the item image, we want to bind the brush to be, well, we want to create a binding for it basically. So just go ahead and create a binding, and we will call this, where did it put it? Here it did. We will call it get icon image. And I'm going to go ahead and add this to a bindings category. Oops, sorry, you can't see. Bindings, and we will make it private and pure and const as well. And so what we want to do inside of here is we want to get the icon that's associated with whatever the item object is and make a brush from that and display that. So we will say item object, we'll say get icon. Oh, we didn't write that function. It's a really simple function. We'll just write it real quick. So back in the item object, we just need to add a function for getting the icon. So we'll just add a function here. Say get icon. Oops. Get icon. And we'll add that to the public category and make it pure const as well. And so what we want to do here is we want to return the icon. So drag in the icon and hook it up like so. And then basically what we want to do here is we either want to return the icon or the rotated icon, depending on if we're rotated or not. And I know we haven't done much with this rotated bool yet, but we might as well just write this function the correct way so we don't have to fix it later. So we just want to drag in rotated, and then we want to do a select. And so if it is rotated, then we want to use the icon rotated. So we'll drag that guy in. But if it's false, then we just want to use the normal icon. And so we will return that. So basically what it's doing is it's either returning the rotated icon if the item object is rotated, otherwise it's just returning the non-rotated icon. All right, and so now back here in our item widget, inside of get item icon, we can say, where were we? Where was I before? Hold on, let me go back to my other project. Here we go. Okay, so we can say get item, or get icon is what it's called. Get icon. And we want to take this and we want to make a brush from it because you can see this returns a slate brush. So we'll say make brush from material. And so the material is going to be our icon. And then the size is just going to be our size. So we'll drag in the size. We will split it and we will drag the X into the trunk, into the width, and the Y into the height, like so. And then we will return that as the return value. All right, and so now our item should show up correctly. So we need to go back and finish the refresh function for our item widget, this guy, I think. So back here in our inventory grid widget, wait, where did we leave off? Oh yeah, refresh. Okay, so let me go back to it in my other project as well so I don't get lost. Right, okay, so if we refresh this node now, it should show us our other pins, which is good. So it takes in the tile size, which we already have, so we'll just pass in our tile size. And then it also takes in the item object, which we have from the loop, so we'll pass that in like so. And it just kind of makes this a little bit nicer. So now it's creating the actual widget for the item. And then the next thing we want to do is we need to bind, or we need to be notified whenever the inventory changes, so that way we can call this function again, so that we can refresh the inventory, if that makes sense. So what we want to do here is back in our item widget object. Wait a minute. Yeah, back in our item widget, we want to add an event dispatcher. Sorry if I'm stumbling through this. It's so confusing. It really is. Okay, so over here in the event dispatcher, we want to add a on removed. And so what this is going to be is it's basically an event dispatcher which gets dispatched whenever an item is removed from the inventory. So let's see. So actually, let's just add this for now because this is going to get hooked up later when we do the drag and dropping. So just add it for right now, and then I guess we'll add the input parameter to it. So add an input parameter because we can't really make use of this yet because we haven't done the drag and dropping, but we need it so that we can bind to it. We'll add a new parameter here, and we will call it, or it will be of type BP item object, and we want to make it item object like so. And so now back here in the inventory grid widget, we want to drag off of this and say bind event to on removed. And then off of this, we just want to say create event. And then if you hit this little drop down, you can actually say create a matching function for me. So we'll just select this guy. And then let's see, where did that create it? Over here, inventory grid widget, autogen. Yeah, this one. So we want to rename this to on item removed. And then why can't I find this in my other project? Oh, there it is. Okay, so we want to take this guy and we want to drag it into the private category, and we want to make it private. And so essentially all we want to do here is we want to remove the item from our inventory component. So let's drag in our inventory component, and we need to make a little function here. I'm just going to create the function, not actually write it, because we'll do that later once we get to removing. So back here in the inventory component, we just want to add a function and call it remove from, or remove item. And obviously this needs to be public. And we just want it to take in an item object. So add a new parameter. We need to change this back to be just a normal parameter, and we will call this the item object. And again, we'll fill this out later. For right now, we just want to have it created so we can call it. And so back here in our inventory grid widget, we just want to call remove item, like so, and then pass in this guy. Okay, and so now back here, oops, let me capitalize this hour. Okay, so now back here, where were we in the event graph? No, we were inside of refresh. So inside of refresh, sorry, I'm going back and forth with my other monitor too. So after we bind to it, we want to then add the child. So the widget we just created, we want to add that to our canvas panel. So we'll say grid canvas panel, add child, and the child we want to add is our widget that we just created. So we can just drag this guy around, something like this. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to set we want to set this widget to be or so that it auto sizes itself. So we'll say cast to canvas panel slot. And actually, let's just make this a pure cast since we know it's going to succeed. And we will say set auto size to true. And we will also set the position of it. So I'm just going to make a little reroute node here and drag off of this and say set position because we need to adjust where the top left corner of this thing is. And so the position, we just need to do a little bit of math. So basically, if you remember from our get all items, it returns to us the item object and it returns the top left tile. So we want to use this top left tile. So let me just drag this over. So we're going to drag this guy all the way over here. And then we will just say break tile. And then I'm just going to add a reroute node just so it's not cutting through everything else. Something like that. Okay, so this is the top left tile of where we want to add this. So in order to get the actual location, we just need to multiply it by the tile size. So we'll say float times tile size. And likewise, we want to do the same thing for the y. So we'll say float times the tile size. And then we can split this guy and pass in the x and the y. And then I believe we are done. So now that we have the refresh function written, if we come back to our initialize, we want to call it here when it's initialized. So drag in the refresh function, like so. And then finally, the last thing we want to do here, or maybe we can run this. It might actually work now if we run this. So let's see. So if we run this and we press I and we go to the gun. Okay, so it picked it up, but it didn't actually draw it. Let's see why it didn't actually draw it. Let me just put a breakpoint here real quick and try to figure that out. So it's calling refresh. Oh wait, because, oh right, obviously I know why. Okay, so the reason it's not doing it is because, well, we need to call this refresh function whenever we pick up a new gun, or whenever we pick up anything, we need to call this function so that it refreshes the inventory. And right now we're only calling this function when it initializes. And the reason we're doing it in the initialization is just in case you start the game with something in your inventory, we obviously want to refresh it so that it starts out as the right thing. But we also need to call this refresh function whenever the inventory changes. And so to do that, inside the inventory component, we're basically going to make an event dispatcher that gets triggered whenever the inventory changes, which we've kind of already touched on that before with that dirty flag. And then we're just going to bind to it here. So back in the inventory component, again, let me open it up on my other monitor. So we're going to make an event dispatcher, and we want to just call it on inventory changed. And then back here in the event tick, what we want to do is we want to check if this dirty flag is set to true. If you remember this guy, if you look, it is being set inside of add item. So whenever we add a new item, it gets set to true. So this is essentially going to be true whenever the inventory has changed. So in the event tick, we just want to check if this flag is set, which of course most of the time it won't be set because most of the time your inventory won't change. But whenever you do pick up something, it will be set to true. And so when it has changed, we just want to set it to false. And then we want to dispatch our on inventory change so that the UI can update. And the reason we're using event dispatcher is just so obviously, so we don't have to continuously redraw the inventory every frame, even if nothing's changed, because obviously if nothing's changed, there's no reason to waste processing power redrawing the whole inventory. So now we just need to bind to this event, which should be pretty simple. So if you go back here to our inventory grid, and then after the refresh, we can say inventory component, and we can say bind to on inventory changed. And then like we did before, we're just going to drag off this guy, and we are going to say create. Actually, we just want to, so we'll say create event, and then we can actually just select the refresh function from this dropdown. So we're basically saying whenever this gets called, call refresh. So now if we run this, let's see if this works. Hopefully it will. So open the inventory, pick up a gun, and there you go. It shows our AK. Now it's showing a little weird right now, but that's just because I have it set to 4x1. So if we come back here, let's change the AK to be like 6x2 or something a little bit more realistic. So we set it to 6x2, and we pick it up. You can see now it adds it to our inventory. Now we can't actually move things yet, and we still have this weird issue where when you select, or when you hold down the left mouse button, it kind of rotates the camera, which we need to fix. But we are getting there, slowly but surely. So we can now see our item. And this would probably be a good time to go ahead and create the other items as well. So I'm going to come back here to the AK, and just really quickly, I'm going to create the other items. So we have the grenade. So all we really need to do inside of here is we just delete all this stuff. All we really need to do is override that, what is it called? Yeah, get default item object, just like we did for the AK. So just like we did for the AK, we can say construct object from class, so we can construct the item object. And we will, of course, select BP underscore item object. And for the outer, again, we're going to use ourself. And then the dimensions. So where are we? We're inside of the grenade. So we're just going to say 1x1. The icon, we're going to use the m underscore icon underscore grenade. And then m underscore icon underscore grenade rotated. And then for the item class, we obviously want to select the grenade. And then we'll hook this up. And then we'll do the same thing for the knife. I'm going to actually just copy these two nodes so that we can paste it. And then go to the knife, open this guy up, delete this stuff just because I don't like it there if I'm not using it. And then override the get default item object, delete this guy, paste in what we copied, except we want to change the dimensions. So the dimensions of the knife is 1x2. And then we want to change this to m underscore icon knife and m underscore icon knife with the rotation. And then we want to change this to knife. So hopefully you can get an idea of how you would add more items. It's pretty straightforward. This is basically all you need to do. And so let's actually drag these guys into the scene. So we'll drag in our knife, and we will drag in, we need to set the static mesh too. So the knife, we need to set the static mesh to be our knife, like so. So now it shows the knife. And then we want to do the same thing for the grenade. So select the static mesh, and we want to set it to grenade. What is it called? Of course, it's not called grenade. It has to be called something weird. Hold on. Let's go figure out what they called it. So meshes, grenade. It's called SMG67. So SM underscore G67. All right, so here we have our grenade. So now if we drag these in, you can see we have our knife in the scene. It's kind of inside of the ground. That's just because the origin's wrong. I mean, you can drag it up if you want, but I'm just going to leave it like that. And then we also want to drag in a grenade. So let's just test all these out real quick and see if it works. So if we press I and we walk over the grenade, it picks up the grenade. If we walk over the knife, it doesn't pick up the knife. We must have something wrong. Let's figure out what is wrong with the knife. So let me make sure I set it up correctly. Get default. Oh, it's because we're not returning it. Duh. Okay, so that fixes that probably. So now if we run this again, pick up the grenade, pick up the knife, and pick up the AK. And you can see it's already figuring out where things should go based on how much room there is and what the size of the item is. So the next thing we need to do, obviously, is get this drag and drop functionality working. And fortunately, we already have a good amount of the groundwork in place, as you can see. But yeah, so we need to do the drag and drop in, and we need to do the rotation, and then I think we will be finished, believe it or not. So I'll probably do that in the next part, so I'll see you guys in the next part.